would like to welcome Dr. Vivek sir. So today's topic is on gait deviation in common neurological disorders. A brief introduction. Okay, so Dr. Vivek Ramanandani, who has done his masters in neurological conditions from Government Physiotherapy College, Ahmedabad under Gujarat University, and is pursuing his PhD from Gujarat University under guidance from Dr. M. Prabhakar sir. Recently, he is working as an assistant professor in physiotherapy college. That's in Surat. That's called SPV's Physiotherapy College. Also, he is currently working as an assistant professor in physiotherapy at SPV College of Physiotherapy, Surat. He has previously worked as a lecturer at Pioneer Physiotherapy College, Vadodara, as a senior lecturer and principal at Satish Goswami College of Physiotherapy at Ahmedabad. Totally, he is having 10 years of experience in the field of physiotherapy. Furthermore, he was awarded the Research Excellence Award in 2020 by Institute of Scholars in Bangalore recently. His research interest is in periodic rehabilitation and family-centered care. He has several national and international publications and presentations. He has also served as a member of Executive Committee of Gujarat Physio Teachers Association. His students describe him as a very enthusiastic and passionate teacher. He describes complex things with his clinical relevance and make it easy to understand and remember. Okay. So this session will give insight on what is gait, how do we define and describe gait cycle, what are the common gait deviations encountered during clinical practice, what are the reasons behind such deviations from the normal gait pattern, video demonstration for normal gait and gait deviations, and at last, actual videos of patients having neurological conditions with deviation with the gait patterns. Now, before starting the webinar, I would like to request all the participants to mute their microphone and video both to avoid chaos, and please don't share your screen. We will be having live question answer session at the end of the webinar. You can ask your doubts by typing in the message box at that time. To go through the session, you can pin into account of Dr. Vivek sir, and suppose you miss anything from the webinar, don't worry, we will be posting this webinar on our YouTube channel. I request all to kindly subscribe our channel on YouTube. Now, without wasting much time, I would welcome Dr. Vivek sir to share his knowledge with us. Over to you, sir.
Hello everyone. I hope I'm audible to everybody. Hello. Hello. Am I audible to everyone? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the confirmation. Uh, First of all, thank you, Dr. Dharmesh, for this generous introduction. And definitely, I would love to thank Team Beats Physio, who has been succeedingly organizing the webinars since the lockdown. I hope everybody is learning a lot, and I would love to add to that knowledge. So we'll start with the webinar. I'll be, as our topic is clear, we'll be discussing the gait deviations which are commonly encountered during our clinical practice. And as Sir has said, first of all, first of all, we will be going through the basics of gait, which I think everybody of you must be knowing. So we'll be starting our journey of gait deviations in common neurological disorders in a second. I hope the screen is visible to everybody. So we will be, is it visible to everyone? Is it visible to everyone, the screen? Can everybody see the screen? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the confirmation. Uh, as the title is suggestive, gait deviation in common neurological conditions is a topic, but we'll not be going into much detail because we have time limitations. So we'll be just doing a brief introductory session today. First of all, when we want to learn about gait, first it is necessary that we know what is gait. And I hope everybody must be knowing that gait is simply the manner how a person is walking for transferring himself or herself from one place to another place. So it is act and manner of walking, and it requires two basic things. First is balance, and the second one is locomotion. Now, many of us must be having a question that we interchangeably use the terminologies gait and locomotion. Then what is the difference? So if we want to define locomotion, it is just moving anything, any human body or physical body from one place to another place. Whereas along with maintaining the balance, as we are human beings, we need to walk erect. So we need the balance of our body to be maintained throughout that process of locomotion. So that is what our gait is. Now, what is so special about gait? Why gait is important for us? Now you are looking at two pictures. First is us human beings, and the second is our ancestors, uh, who are supposed to be the base from where we have been evolved. So what makes us different from our ancestors is a higher mental thinking process, cognitive thinking process, and the speech communication. Along with that, what makes us unique is our gait or walking ability in an erect posture. So that is why gait makes us special as a human being. It is a learned skill which is involving many complex motor components along with the combination of balance, motor control, cognition, as well as the musculoskeletal functions. It is critical to an individual's quality of life, because if we are not able to walk, we are not able to maintain balance while walking, we may compromise multiple of functions in our daily life. So it will compromise ultimately the quality of our lives. Now, not going into details of gait cycle, we will just briefly look at this picture and learn about the titles of the phases. As we know, gait cycle itself suggests that it is a cyclical pattern where an event is repeatedly done. So that event is walking, and it is further divided into the sub events such as heel strike, which is first event of a gait cycle. After that, there is foot flat, where our body is transmitted further ahead. Next is mid stance, where the body weight is transmitted and transferred ahead on our weight bearing extremity. After that, there is heel off, when we will be shifting our weight from one leg to another. And That is why the weight bearing leg, which was previously responsible for shifting the body anteriorly or forward, is now being loaded off the weight. After that, there is toe off, and then the limb will go into the air. Opposite extremity will be bearing the weight. So early swing is that phase. Then after mid swing, which will bring the swing leg or non-weight bearing leg into the further forward direction. After that, there is late swing or deceleration, where we are again preparing to load that limb. So this is our gait cycle, where initial phases are known as heel strike, foot flat, mid stance, heel off, and toe off are also called summatively as stance phase, because throughout this phase, our body weight is borne over one limb or our reference limb. It considers 60% of the total gait cycle. Whereas the second phase, where the limb is off the ground, it is known as swing leg, swing phase, and the weight bearing is on the opposite extremity. This phase consists of 40% of the gait cycle. Here is a small video about the gait cycle. We will just go through it faster so that we can revise. I hope it is audible soon, and it will brush up the gait cycle events for you. So we just brush up the stages. First, during the image, we use the terminology which was slightly different, which was conservative terminologies, and this is a new terminology, RLA terminology for the gait cycle. Now we'll be looking at neural control of gait. We'll not be going into details again, because it is a detailed thing which cannot be covered in this short period. Here I will be first explaining you these short forms which are given in the image. First is that SLR, that is subthalamic locomotive region, then MLR, that is midbrain locomotive region, then medullary reticular formation, and then cerebellar locomotor regions. These are the areas which are responsible for initiation and continuation of the gait. Now, if we divide the gait cycle to be controlled into two different levels, first will be the level at the spinal cord, which is known as central pattern generators. So CPGs are the level at the spinal cord which will be controlling your gait cycle. In the second image here, you can see that is frontal region or frontal cortex, which is planning how we are walking, how we are initiating the gait, and what are the adjustments which will be needed. After that, there is subcortical region or pathways which is connecting the frontal cortex to the main executive areas, which are subcortical and in the brainstem and cerebellum. Third region is the spinal cord. These are the areas which are controlling the output of gait. So whenever we are walking, these are the areas which are executive or planning and executive, having executive and planning function. Whereas the efferent functions that are through the ascending tracks from somatosensory, vestibular, and visual inputs to the cerebellum, and then through the thalamus to the higher motor cortex or frontal cortex. Now, next one, if we classify the causes of gait disorders or deviations, there are two type of causes which can lead to deviation into the gait pattern. First is neurological and second is non-neurological. We'll be discussing the neurological gait deviations only. We'll not be going into the non-neurological causes. First is stroke, which we commonly come across. Second is movement disorders such as Parkinsonism or chorea or athetosis. Then cerebellar disorder, which is ataxia. Then spinal disorder, such as the spinal cord injury or paraplegia, then cerebral palsy, motor neuron diseases. Multiple disorders are affecting the neurological, causing the neurological gait deviations. Next one is non-neurological causes, where visual disorders, which is one of the afferent inputs. Second is arthritis, because of the pain and associated degeneration or weakness. There can be gait deviations. Next is functional limiting disorders, such as cardiac or vascular or pulmonary diseases, which may affect the speed and pattern of walking, associated with the pain or functional compromises. Other than that, can be psychological disorders, which may cause person who have distress or fear of fall, and can be leading to the cautious kind of gait pattern, which is again a deviation from the normal gait pattern. I hope till this everybody is clear with the gait deviation. Next, we'll be going through the anatomic clinical classification of the gait disorders, which is provided by Snyder's et al. The anatomical clinical classification basically makes it easy for us to understand that which area of brain is affected when particular clinical presentation during the gait observation is seen. So if we find out the reason for gait deviation, and if we come to know that if the frontal cortex is affected, or there is affection of the connection of frontal cortex with the basal ganglia or brainstem, and affection of the basal ganglia itself, then we can call it higher level gait disorders. This is the first level or topmost level of the affection in CNS or neurological system, where the gait can be affected or deviated. Next, the difficulties which are associated or causes because of what the higher level affection causes the gait disorder are difficulty in integration of the somatosensory information, which is being provided by the afferent systems. Then there is improper selection and execution of motor plans, which are being formatted or planned or programmed at the frontal cortex, and absent postural or gait reflexes. Parkinsonian gait or psychogenic gait can be considered as an example of higher level gait disorders. After that, if the affection is found at corticospinal tracts or pyramidal tract levels, or basal ganglia and associated surrounding subcortical structures are affected, or if we see that cerebellar function is affected, then it is known as the middle level gait disorder. In the middle level gait disorders, there is impairment in the force modulation. Once the higher motor centers plan out that this amount of force, and there is affection of that force modulation execution, as we saw at the secondary level, then it is called impaired force modulation. Whatever amount of force or contraction of the muscles is required, it is not properly executed. Then there is improper modulation of postural and locomotion responses. Examples of these kind of gaits are spastic gait, ataxic gait. Next is, if we look at the affection of muscles or somatosensory pathways are affected from the tactile or proprioceptive receptors, or vestibular and visual system are affected, then we can call it as a lower level gait disorders. This is the lowermost level of gait disorders, where because of the affection of these kind of inputs or afferent inputs, there is disturbance of production of the force at the level of muscles, or because of the improper sensory inputs or affection of the pathways, there is absent or altered postural or gait reflexes. This kind of gait is seen in neuropathy or myopathy or vestibulopathy, which is vestibular system affection. So this is the superficial anatomic clinical classification of our gait disorder. Now, what are the commonest gait deviations which we come across in the clinical practice that we are going to see? Examples of upper and middle level gait deviations, if we are going to look at, then they are first and common most is hemiplegic gait, which is also known as circumducted gait or hip hiking or pelvic lifting gait. Now, second is spastic gait, which can be associated with hemiplegia or vascular insult to the brain, or it can be again associated with the cerebral palsy, which is most common, or it can be affected along with the spinal cord injury. So, depending upon the multiple levels of affection, spastic gait can be again described as seizuring or toe walking gaits. And the third one, which is most common, is Parkinsonian gait, which is again known as magnetic or freezing gait or shuffling and fascinating walking or gait pattern. So these are the superficial characteristics, or just the names, alternative names of these gaits. We'll be looking into the details of these gaits. First, typical findings of upper and middle level gait deviations, as we know, are short stride length. The person will walking with short steps and stride. The stance is abnormal. The person is having fear of fall, or because of the balance and postural correction issues, he or she will be maintaining a wider base of support, and the person may have crossing of the legs, as we commonly see with the CP kids. There are episodes of freezing, which is also called motor blocks, and then there are chances of loss of balance, which will be secondary to the perturbation, or maybe at even rest, the person will not be able to stand or sit without support in a controlled manner. Other than this, there are the symptoms which are commonly seen are postural adjustments are disturbed when the person is modifying the gait, or the person is trying to change the pattern of gait to accommodate a particular task, or doing activities such as rising from the chair or turning in the bed. Along with that, there are, because of the spasticity or tonal issues, hip, trunk and legs can be seen, which is also known as military gait. Then there can be leg apraxia. Apraxia, we know, generally is a terminology which is used to describe the planning or execution difficulties. So when the frontal areas are affected of the brain, there are chances of issues with planning, and the person will be having issues while stepping or bicycling kind of movement, where the planning and execution are easily affected. There is minimal or no improvement with cues when the frontal region of the brain is affected. First, we'll be looking at this image. I hope everybody recognizes it. This is the image of a hemiplegic patient who is walking with a cane in his right hand or normal side. Left side is affected. This is hemiplegic gait. And what are the typical characteristics of hemiplegic gait? First, the person is having to difficulty in walk because the paretic leg is swung laterally and forward so that the person can easily clear the ground and the foot clearance and heel strike is easier for him. There are chances of a fall. So person tries to hike or lift the foot and circumduct or swing the leg forward to avoid the fall. Second, pelvis on the affected side is lifted vertically so that the foot is cleared easily. Next is the limb leg is affected. The affected side limb seems longer because the limb is unable to flex due to spasticity of the extensors as well as the inability of flexors to generate enough force. So the affected limb seems longer as compared to the unaffected limb, and that is why knee is into hyperextension and the person needs to hike or lift the pelvis on the affected side. Next is arm swing is affected. Either it is asymmetric or it is totally lost on the affected side, and the person tries to keep the upper limb into adduction and flexion at the shoulder and elbow flexion postures, which is common, and it is seen in this image. Now, step length, as we discussed in the common features, is definitely reduced, and associated features such as spastic tone or clonus or hyperreflexia, shoe wear, or staggering and falling are also present with the hemiplegic gait. We'll be having a demonstrating video where you will be seeing the hemiplegic gait.
So sorry for interruption, but audio is not audible of this video.
Okay, no worries. I'll explain.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Uh, in this video, we may start it again if there is an issue. Uh, Here, the person or the sir is demonstrating hemiplegic gait and is explaining that because the knee is into hyperextension along with the calf hypertonicity or spasticity, there is foot which is also into plantar flex position, and that is why the person is not able to clear the ground easily. So the person has to lift the pelvis on the side of the affection and he is to swing the limb forward. So he's just demonstrating what we discussed. Along with that, he is also saying that the lower extremity is not only affected and the upper extremity is also affected. That is why the upper extremity posture is also described along with the video. So just have a look at the video. We'll be starting the video again. Here he also mentioned that the associated movement of upper extremity, that is our arm swings, which is absent here. So there is no reciprocating movement of the upper limb, and along with that, the audio is not audible here of the this video. But while the person walks, because of the shuffling and circumduction, when the person puts the foot on the ground, there is loss of heel strike. So along the forefoot comes first, and there is chance that the person may fall because of the dragging of the toes to the ground if the circumduction and hiking is not enough. Now we'll go to the next pattern. I hope everybody will be easily identifying this kind of posture, which is commonly seen with the spastic diplegic cerebral palsy patients. The knees are knocked; they are completely in adducted position. Lower extremity and lower legs are into the valgus position, and the foot are flat and pronated. So this is our typical spastic or spastic diplegic gait, where the lower extremities are more affected as compared to the upper extremities in cerebral palsy kind of condition. So this is the second commonest kind of gait which we usually come across. Now the common features for this kind of gait are bilaterally the step length is shortened, which is again a common characteristic of all kind of upper and middle level of gait, almost all kind of upper and middle type of gait deviations when the person is having upright posture. Second is the foot is striking and crossing the midline and goes to the opposite side. So the legs are crossing over each other. So it is known as scissoring, which we call commonly a scissoring gait. So there are chances of having scissoring gait only a person only a patient who is having tight adductors, tight medial hands. So along with that, there are also chances of scissoring gait in the patient who are having pelvis instability and hip pelvis dissociation issues. But commonly we consider the adductor tightness only. Now, second type of modification in the spastic gait, when there is foot strike on the ground, the heel does not come first, and ball of toes or feet come first. It is called toe walking. So this kind of toe walking pattern is generally seen when the heel cords or TA muscles are extremely tight and the heels are remaining off the ground. So the person does not have heel strike, rather than he is having the toe strike pattern, and that is why it is called toe walking. If in this kind of patient we go for surgery or extreme physiotherapy, intensive physiotherapy sessions, or post surgery of a lengthening of TA, if the lengthening of TA is more than the required, then there is excessive dorsiflexion because the plantar flexors or tendoachilles group is over lengthened. And that is why, because of the excessive dorsiflexion of foot, there is combination or compensation with the hip and knee flexion along with the slouch posture of the upper trunk. This is again known as the crouch gait pattern. So three variations. First is scissoring when the adductors are severely tight. Second is toe walking when the TA or heel cords are severely tight, and if after correction or because of the weakness of the dorsiflexors, there is excessive dorsiflexion of the foot, there are chances of the crouch gait. Along with that, the child will keep arms in the low or mid guarding position, so that he or she can avoid the fall. There is fear of falling because of the postural correction issues and associated features such as spastic tone or clonus or hyperreflexia and abnormal shoe wear if the child is wearing the shoe can be present along with this kind of gait. Again, for the same, we will be having a demonstrating video. Here again, the features which you already discussed are only mentioned. I will give you an additional commentary if it is required. I'll be playing the video. So here he just mentioned that in diplegic kind of CP, the hips and knees are flexed and the knees are together because of the severe adductor spasticity and tightness. Because of that, the posture of child will be like this. So he just demonstrated the movement of lower extremities where the child or the patient has to lift the pelvis along with the lower extremity and circumduct it and put it ahead along with the movement of the trunk. Now he'll be demonstrating the pattern of the upper extremities. Here he just displayed the low guard and mid guard position. Low guard is the position when the upper extremities are just at the level of waist or below the level of waist. Here the chances of fall are less, and because of that the fear of fall are less, and the child keeps the arms in the low guard position. But when the fear of fall is more, the disability is more, tightness is more, the center of gravity and base of support are not properly being adjusted while walking, the child has to keep the arm in a mid guard position, which is around the level of the abdomen and umbilicus. Now, next, we are going to see this posture and along with that associated gait. Here you can see that the patient is having severely crouch or forward bend posture along hip and knee flexion and trying to maintain the visual contact by extending the neck. This is the typical Parkinsonian posture, and associated with that is the Parkinsonian gait. In the image we have seen showing, we are seeing that extreme case of Parkinson's, not the initial phases where the patient is having less amount of disability. Characteristic of Parkinson levels of affection in the later stage of Parkinson's, there is complete inability for the patient to initiate a gait. So it is also called magnetic or freezing gait. The patient is not able to easily initiate the gait or not initiate the gait at all. And it is researchers are saying that once the episodes of freezing are increased, then after within 2 to 3 or maximum by 5 months, the patient becomes wheelchair bound. So it is a research that freezing as an indication of increasing disability during the Parkinson's. Second is when the person is not having that much of affection and the person is just not able to clear the foot, then the person just shuffles the foot across the ground, and this is audible. You can hear the shuffling voice, and that is called shuffling gait. Next, along with the gait issues, there is stooped posture, and this stooped posture leads to the, as we are seeing in this image, this kind of stooped posture leads to center of gravity falling outside the base of support, and the patient has to maintain the base of support below the center of gravity, and that is why he or she tries to walk faster. That is called enteroperism. In the cases where this much amount of stoop posture is not there, and the person is able to stand erect or slightly stoop in stooping posture, then there are chances of retropulsion. When the person tries to walk back, there are chances of falling backwards because center of gravity again falls outside the base of support, and that the person has to walk faster. That is called retropulsion. Next, there is gait speed which is uncontrolled. Initially, the person may start slow, but when the person once starts walking, the person is not able to start or control the speed of gait. That is why it is called fascinating gait. These are all same seen in the Parkinsonian patient at different stages. Along with that, because of these postural and gait issues and inability to control the posture or gait, there is increased tendency to fall because of the inappropriate responses or reflexes to the postural needs. Associated extrapyramidal signs such as tremors or cochlear rigidity are also seen. Again, we'll see the demonstration video. Here he is mentioning this gait as a hypokinetic gait, and typical condition which is we are seeing clinically is Parkinson's. That is why we also call it a Parkinsonian gait. But along with the Parkinson's, there are many conditions where you can see this kind of hypokinetic gait. Hypokinetic gait is where you have issues with initiation and freezing kind of episode. He is demonstrating the posture, and then he is having difficulty in initiating. There are small steps initially and associated tremors, as you can see, which are pill rolling or money counting repetitive tremors. And then gradually the speed increased. Now he is showing the turning pattern. The person has to turn with small steps in smaller arc of radius, like a statue. It is known as turning and block. And again, initially the person will be having issues, and then gradually the speed of gait increased. I hope everybody is clear. Demonstration video is fine for you. Next, we'll be looking at the further gait deviations. Again, more three deviations which are common: middle and lower level gait deviations. First is ataxic gait, which is also known as over or undershooting gait, or cerebellar gait, or staggering gait. Commonly, it is also known as the drunken gait. Second is myopathic gait, where because of the proximal muscle weakness, there is waddling or Trendelenburg gait or lurching gait. Then there is neuropathic gait, where there is slapping or steppage or high steppage gait. Common features for these lower middle level gait disorders are cerebellar gait, for there is wider base of stance and associated disequilibrium, overall dyssynergia and dysmetry and titubation. I'm not going into details. I expect that the terminologies are clear, or if you are in the junior years, then the terminologies will be clear in the upcoming. For myopathic gait, there is commonly proximal muscle weakness, as I discussed. The toe walking is commonly seen. There is chances of waddling and lordosis along with the other issues. Next is neuropathic gait, where there is steppage gait with the distal weakness. As compared to the myopathic gait, the neuropathic gait will be having, the patient will be having more of the distal muscle weakness. Along with that, because the nerves or neurological involvement is there are chances of distal sensory loss. The person seems more cautious while walking. And when we give visual guidance, it improves. But if we remove the visual input, we close the eyes, we make the patient walk in dark area, then the gait deviation exaggerates. First, we'll be looking at ataxia. Common symptoms: dyssynergia of leg movements. The leg placements are irregular and variable with each and every step. Second is dysmetria, where the foot placement is erratic. The person wants to place his foot at a certain place, but is not able because of the overshooting or undershooting of foot. The person is not able to maintain upright posture, and the person has to walk with a broader base of support. The pattern is slow and cautious. Along with that, there is disequilibrium and postural adjustments are dysmetric. You can associate it, symptoms in, you can find out titubations and truncal attacks. Now we'll be looking at the ataxic gait pattern demonstration video. Here is describing the wide base of support and the issues with the steadiness even at rest. There is side to side truncal ataxia or decubations, which is having frequency of 3 to 5 tremors per second. Even in standing, the person is having difficulty. So if we narrow the base, make him walk in tandem gait, then difficulty will be increased. This is one of the technique of looking or observing the gait and exaggerating the ataxic symptoms so we can easily identify them. We are looking the disequilibrium and along with that the postural issues, so the person is having more chances of fall. Next, we are going to look at the myopathic gait. Proximal muscles are weak, and that is why mostly in myopathies such as Duchenne's muscular dystrophy or myopathy itself, there is weakness of proximal muscles like gluteus medius, and that is why the stance leg, which normally when we are walking, normally our stance leg abductor muscles or gluteus medius, which is a primary abductor, tries to maintain the horizontal position of the pelvis on the weight bearing leg. But because of the myopathy, as the medius muscle is weak, the person is not able to maintain the horizontal position of the pelvis on the stance leg. So the pelvis drops on the opposite side and the trunk leans over the stance leg to correct it, to compensate the pelvic drop on the opposite side. Okay, so because of the gluteus medius, there is drop of the pelvis on the opposite side or swing leg and the lean of the trunk towards the stance leg. But if the person is not able to compensate, there is leaning of trunk towards the swing side or the pelvis dropping side. So there are both the possibilities. In gluteus medius weakness, the person may compensate by leaning towards the leaning towards the stance side, and the person may not be able to compensate, and the trunk will also be leaning towards the pelvis drop or swing side. If the drop is unilateral because of the weakness of the muscle unilaterally, it is called as Trendelenburg gait. And if the muscle weakness is bilateral and waddling is in dropping is bilaterally, then it is a waddling. Second most common muscle affected is gluteus maximus. On the stance leg, the trunk lurches back over the stance leg and hip thrusts forward to compensate the hyperextension of the trunk because of the gluteus medius weakness. If same way it is uncompensated, then the trunk also lurches forward along with the hip heel strike. So during the myopathy, along with this kind of proximal major muscle weakness, there is other hip muscles which are weak, and it is usual condition when there is only unilateral affection. Demonstration of a myopathic gait. Proximal or pelvic muscle weakness. Left side is weight bearing, and there is drop of pelvis on the right side. That is, he is showing leaning of shifting of the trunk towards the opposite side for the compensation. So the patient does side flexion of the trunk towards the stance leg along with the hyperextension of trunk, and compensates for the pelvis drop on the opposite side. Left is the stance leg, pelvis drops on right, and trunk lift shifts to the opposite side. This is waddling gait, is showing bilateral weakness. So pelvis drops and the shifting is towards the opposite side. Now next, we will be seeing neurological or neuropathic gait, where distal muscles are weak. Common feature is weakness of ankle dorsiflexors or increased tone of the plantar flexors. And because of that, knee on the side of the foot drop is lifted higher. So the foot can be cleared off the ground and the leg can be swung forward. That is known as high step agility. If there is inadequate toe elevation during the swing phase, and the foot will slap onto the ground when there is supposed to be the heel strike. So it is called slapping gait. The gait, while we are discussing the gait abnormalities in the gait patterns or deviations which discussed on the upper and middle level gait disorders, the gait, the step length was generally reduced. And because of that, the stride length also was reduced. Here, the step length is almost normal, but the person has to walk with a wider base to maintain the posture and balance. The gait is slower because the person has to work more to lift the lower extremity and clear the ground. Associated distal sensory loss, Romberg's sign, and foot injury can be present. Here is the neuropathic gait demonstration. Distal lower extremities are commonly affected. Dorsiflexors are affected, and that is why not able to dorsiflex the foot. So the person has to step high. So this is your neuropathic gait. Now, while doing clinical gait examination, what common things we have to consider along with the gait or posture during the rest as well as during the walking. Second base, if it is more than 6 to 8 centimeters between two limbs, then it is considered as broad base and the person is having chances of fall, and that is why the broad base is attained. We also have to look for the initiation if it is slow or normal volitional, or if the person is having difficulties even if he or she is trying, that is freezing. Stride length has to be seen, and along with that stride appearance, how the person is lifting the foot or how the person is flexing the hip and knees, how much amount of flexion is there and how far he or she is keeping the foot is to be seen. Stability has to be observed throughout the walking, and how the person is trying to turn. If he is trying to turn as a statue, as we saw in the hypokinetic Parkinsonian gait, or not, it is also to be observed. We can also add provocative maneuvers, one we saw in the cerebellar ataxic gait demonstration. Others are Trendelenburg sign or Gower's sign for proximal muscle weakness in myopathies. Heel and toe walking for the muscles of the distal muscles of the lower extremities. For heel walking, we'll need the dorsiflexor muscles. If they are not working properly, then the person will not be able to walk on heel. And similarly, for toe walking, we need strong plantar flexors, and we can check plantar flexor weakness for the person through the toe walking. Next is tandem gait, which we saw in the ataxic gait. Stress gait is a gait which identifies the initial patients who are having difficulties with gait in the Parkinson's condition. The person is asked to walk on the lateral borders of the foot, and the person who is not able or has having difficulties in walking, that is supposed to be developing Parkinson's in the great later stages. Next is pull test. We generally stand behind the patient. Then the patient is asked to walk with the feet apart in the normal base of support, and wide, slightly abducted upper extremities. We pull the patient backwards, and the person is asked to maintain the balance. But definitely, we first have to inform the person that we are going to perform this maneuver. Next is Romberg sign for differentiation between the proprioceptive and visual kind of issues. These are things which we need to do in addition to the general neurologic examination. First, we have to consider the general neurologic examination. Additional complaints or associated complaints which are commonly seen are stumbling, postural instability, weakness, slowness of gait, shuffling, fatigability, staggering and falling, numbness or heaviness or stiffness of the extremities. These are the common complaints which can be present or may not be present depending upon the affected region. In the last session, we'll be looking at the exercises. I hope everybody is here only, and we'll be looking at a few videos. I expect you all to identify which gate is that, and if possible, you can answer me by unmuting your mics. First video. I'll give you a hint. Upper extremity posture, dragging of toes, circumduction.
Hemiplegic gait.
Yes, definitely it is a typical
Circumductory gait.
circumductory gait is also right. Yes, hemiplegia is the condition where the person has to walk with the circumduction or hiking of the limb. Next, this small girl is asked to walk slightly wide base of support, lifting the limb slightly higher than the opposite side. You can see that he is not able to fully dorsiflex the foot. Any ideas, answers?
High stepping
Neuropathic
gait.
gait.
Okay,
Neuropathic gait.
neuropathic or high steppage gait is right. Here in lateral view, also you can see that she is not able to put her heel completely on the ground. That may be because of the heel cord tightness. Next. Here the uncle is asked to walk. You can see one side arm swing is fine, opposite side he is not swinging the arm almost at all. He is having difficulty in stopping.
Shuffling gait.
Sorry?
Shuffling gait.
Shuffling gait, hesitant gait, because the person is not able to stop on command.
Stop, okay.
It is a hypokinetic Parkinsonian kind of gait. The person is having intermediate affection. Now we'll be asked, here we are asking the patient to stop on command. First time he is able to manage certain amount, but here he is not able to stop at all. He has to take a step forward to prevent falling down. So this was a hypokinetic Parkinsonian gait. And now this. This is the commonest gait which we come across.
Waddling
Even in the
gait.
orthopedic conditions. Yes,
Waddling gait.
because of the weakness of the abductors. Bilaterally, the person is not able to stabilize the pelvis on the stance limb, and the pelvis drops on the opposite side. That is why he has to compensate by leaning the trunk on the stance side. So I hope this finishes our session, and I expect everybody has learned a lot, or at least a little. I'll request Dharmesh sir to start the
Yes, sir.
question and answer sessions.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for a wonderful presentation, and we are really honored. I'm sure all your words will be helpful to all those who are attended the webinar.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so yeah. So now the question and answer session is on. So all those who are having any questions can type in the comment box down.
Anybody who is having any questions, please.
Any questions to those who are having any doubts can type in the comment box.
If there are no questions, I can consider nobody has learned anything, or maybe everybody has learned everything.
So there is one question
Yes,
from
okay.
Dr. Paras Bura, like while assessing the gate, which parameters we need to keep in mind?
Okay. Whenever we are assessing the gate, first of all, as we do in routine evaluation, we have to consider the history part, how gradually it evolved, or if it is an acute onset, along with if there is history of development of weakness or sensory and motor symptoms or trauma, then we can localize the lesion. Along with that, while examining, we first have to, as I mentioned in the points, we have to look at the posture and the balance and postural reactions, the stride and strength. This is about the clinical examination, just observational analysis. And I'm not going to look into the quantitative analysis of the gait, because we are mostly dealing with the clinical point. So we have to look at the ability of the person to maintain the balance along with the pattern, as we just went through the various patterns. The muscle weakness, if it is there, or there is hypertonia, it will reveal a uh, particular image of a person. So we have to try and find out that specific symptom or specific sign as we are observing the gait.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So it is Dr. Paraspura sir has asked, like in related to the environment also. Can you please describe in related to the environment?
Okay. While we are looking at the gate, we have to definitely initially consider the environment to make standards, so the person can walk properly without the risk of fall or injury. Then gradually we will make the environment difficult, as we know the vestibular, visual, and proprioceptive somatosensory aspects are also coming into role. So we first make the person walk onto the normal flat and hard surface. Then we gradually reduce the sensory inputs, first proprioceptive and somatosensory, and then we can further go ahead by closing the eyes or dimming the lights or totally shutting down the lights, and thereby increasing the difficulty by reduction of the somatosensory input. So changes in environment will are considered as a provocative maneuvers. As we saw, tandem walking, that is also a provocative maneuver, and walking from the hard surface to a foam surface to a totally soft surface, that again we are changing the environment, and thus we are changing the inputs. So definitely the output of gate or system from the neurological system is going to change.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So there is another question from Karishma ma'am, like how to improve the freezing episode in Parkinsonian's gait.
Okay. Basically, whenever we are working with the Parkinson's, we work as a whole on the patient, and the freezing itself, it is because of the initiation issues. So we have to work on the higher mental function, first planning, and then secondary phase of execution comes, where because of the rigidity or tonal issues, the person will not be having to, yeah, will not be able to easily initiate the thing. So we have to train along with the cues. Patient can be treated as a base maneuvers or base techniques by rigidity management, truncal rotations, and all these things which we use to manage rigidity.
Thank you, sir. So one another more question, like from Jenny Patela, ma'am. Sir, is it possible that the same at the same time more than one type of gait is present
Okay,
at the
it
same
is
time?
very much, yes, it is very much possible. And we just saw the demonstration videos. The demonstration videos are performed by a normal person. So he or she can describe only one kind of pattern, typical pattern. But when we see a patient, tell a 75-year-old arthritic patient with a hemiparesis, so definitely he or she will be having hemiparetic kind of gait along with the waddling because of the severe arthritis on the opposite side. So there are chances of mixture of the gait patterns. So we do not diagnose on the base of gait only, and as a whole we have to look at the patient and diagnose them.
Thank you, sir. So we'll wait for 2 more minutes, then we'll end up this webinar.
Yes, sure. I hope
Those, yeah,
my answers are satisfactory for whoever is uh, asking the questions. You can contact me for details about the questions. As I already said, the session, 1 hour session was shorter for this large topic, and I have to go fast. So you can ask uh, personally through mail, or my mobile number is also available online anywhere you if you search, definitely. Uh, any more questions,
yes, sir.
please?
Any more questions? Those who having any doubt or questions can ask me in the comment box. Yes, so I think so all the doubts are clear. Yes, sir. So any home advice you want to give to the upcoming therapist or physiotherapist? Any advice,
Uh,
sir?
Main advice which I would like to give is many people are there would like to disappoint or more get your moral down about the physiotherapy field. Don't just do it. We are in a great field of helping the people. Money is there definitely. So we have to uh, proud of we have to be proud of our field, and definitely if we want to succeed in our field, we have to work hard, keep learning. That is the main source.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, now I would like to thank and show my gratitude to founder, president, and chairman Shri Jagdish Bhai Patel, sir, and CMD Honorable Shri Dhruv Bhai Patel, sir, and joint managing trustee Srimati Kamal Ben Patel, madam. I would also like to thank to campus director Shri S.K. Patel sir, our principal Dr. Mehul Jadhav sir, who is the principal of BITS Institute of Physiotherapy, and Dr. Sarfaraz Nawaz sir, who is the vice principal of BITS Institute of Physiotherapy, to make this webinar a successful event. Also to Dr. Avni madam, who is the HOD of Computer Department, Barbaria Institute of Technology for technical support, Dr. Mr. Gadedada for wonderful graphic design, and lastly to all the participants, students, and BITS faculty members for good cooperation. BITS Institute
you,
of
sir.
Physiotherapy will continue to organize such presentations in future. Thank you all once again.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir. I would also love to thank
Thank you.
Team
Thank you, sir.
Leads, Principal Sir, Mehul Sir, Sarfaraz Sir, especially you for coordinating this webinar,
Thank you.
and Dr. Rutika for initiating the process for this webinar. Thank you all very much. Keep learning.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.